U.S. President Donald Trump says he will now impose a 50% tariff on copper imports. He made the declaration at a cabinet meeting in Washington, but it's unclear exactly when the new tariff will take effect.
We did aluminum, 50%. Lumber just came out, and now today we're doing copper.
A 50% tariff on copper? Trump just pulled the trigger. At 9 a.m. sharp, copper markets erupted. Futures on the New York Mercantile Exchange surged to a mind-numbing $6.08 per pound, smashing previous highs and setting off global alarm bells. Effective August 1st, Trump declared, "We're locking it down, 50% copper duty, period." That single sentence detonated a market frenzy. In just hours, prices soared 14.2%, the largest one-day spike in copper trading history. Even veteran traders were stunned. And suddenly, U.S. copper trades at a 27% premium over London's benchmark, blowing apart supply chain parity. The fallout? Direct. Immediate. Canada's $9.3 billion copper artery, from Quebec mines to Asian smelters, back to U.S. assembly lines, is now under siege. That loop, designed over decades, just became a liability. Canada now faces two impossible choices: either absorb the tariff and bleed billions, or cut the U.S. out entirely. Ottawa isn't sitting idle. Talks are already underway with South Korea and Japan to reroute refined metal shipments away from the U.S., a tectonic shift in the copper corridor. But this isn't just global finance. Back on the ground, consumers are bracing for impact. Cox Automotive projects a $6,200 hike per vehicle for cars assembled north of the border. If the full tariff sticks, that could climb well over $10,000, pricing millions out of the market. So brace yourselves. In this report, we'll break down Trump's tariff first, strategy later approach, examine Canada's brewing retaliation, and ask a question that could define the 2025 race. Will Americans foot the bill for another trade war every time they flip a switch or drive to work? Just after sunrise on July 11th, copper shipments bound for the port of Los Angeles were halted mid-transit. Logistics firms, faced with a 50% incoming tariff, froze operations to reassess contracts signed just days earlier. "We can't price this," said one executive at Maersk, "not with a midnight tax that rewrites every invoice." The ripple hit fast. In El Paso, one of America's largest copper wire producers issued an emergency advisory to suppliers, warning of delays and renegotiations. Overnight, the copper tariff turned every delivery into a liability. Behind the chaos lies a number: 810,000 tons. That's how much refined copper the U.S. imported in 2024. Half of that came from Canada, Mexico, and Asia. Now, every pound will incur a 50% surcharge, unless an exemption deal is struck by August 1st. The message from the White House is clear: sign now or pay later. But the policy isn't just economic muscle flexing. Buried in Section 232 of the proclamation, the administration invoked strategic vulnerabilities in U.S. copper supply, claiming critical infrastructure, from EVs to missiles, faces unacceptable exposure to foreign bottlenecks. Trade lawyers say that language triggers national security exemptions at the WTO, making any challenge by Canada or others more complex. Still, Ottawa has fired back diplomatically, calling the move industrial sabotage disguised as patriotism. Markets wasted no time reacting. By midday July 11th, COMEX copper hit $12,470 per metric ton, an 18% surge in less than 36 hours. Traders called it a copper quake. Over in Shanghai, futures popped as well, as Chinese buyers braced for tighter supply and rerouted purchase orders to South American smelters. That arbitrage has created a profit window not seen in decades. With U.S. prices rocketing and London Metal Exchange quotes lagging, the transatlantic spread now exceeds $1,800 per ton, wide enough to reroute entire supply chains. Shipping companies are scrambling to capitalize. Mediterranean Shipping Company has already rebooked eastbound cargo from British Columbia, bypassing U.S. ports entirely. The incentive? Sell copper high in New Orleans, buy it low in Rotterdam, hedge the gap, and pocket the difference. Canada's copper miners are racing to respond. Tech Resources confirmed it had chartered 3 new bulk carriers to ferry concentrate directly to Busan and Nagoya, while Glencore is in talks with South Korea's LS Nikko Copper for expedited processing contracts. These aren't temporary fixes. They're the scaffolding of a new Pacific corridor, one that cuts the US out of the loop. Meanwhile, US manufacturers are caught in the crossfire. Ford, Tesla, and General Motors all rely on a copper-intensive supply chain that runs through Canada and Asia. Tesla's Fremont plant, which builds over 500,000 EVs per year, now faces raw material costs that could climb by $100 million annually if the duty sticks. Sources at Ford's procurement division say the company is reviewing whether to push suppliers to absorb the cost or pass it down to customers. Either way, sticker shock looms. That shock is already visible in the grid. The Biden administration's ambitious transmission upgrade plan, which aims to add 100,000 miles of high-voltage line by 2035, now faces massive cost overruns. Each mile requires up to 5 tons of copper. The tariff adds an estimated $3,000 per ton to imported material, potentially inflating the total project cost by $1.5 billion. Grid operators in Texas and California are reportedly lobbying Congress for emergency subsidies or carve-outs. And COPPA's influence doesn't end there. U.S. ammunition producers, who use copper jackets for rounds, warn that production costs will spike just as defense contracts surge in response to global conflicts. Federal premium ammunition in Minnesota has already slowed output and flagged future delays if prices remain above $12,000 per ton. The Department of Defense has yet to issue updated guidance but is reportedly considering strategic reserve releases to stabilize the market. Ottawa is not sitting idle. Prime Minister Mark Carney has dispatched a senior delegation to Seoul, Tokyo, and Lima to solidify alternative trade routes. Simultaneously, Canada's Trade Ministry is exploring expedited free trade talks with ASEAN and the Mercosur bloc, aiming to anchor long-term demand in Asia and Latin America. "We have no choice but to pivot," said one insider. "The US just made itself an unreliable customer." Back in Washington, the political blowback is mounting. Senate Democrats from Michigan and Ohio are demanding tariff exemptions for automakers. Meanwhile, Republicans from copper-producing states like Arizona and Utah back the move, citing job creation and national resilience. It's a rare split that may fracture both parties as the election cycle heats up. With less than 2 weeks until the deadline, global buyers are hedging every angle. European importers are stockpiling ahead of expected price jumps, while Chinese firms are front-loading purchases from Chile and Peru. The copper chessboard is in motion, and every square has a dollar sign. As the copper tariff takes hold, ripple effects are reaching far beyond boardrooms and warehouses. In Phoenix, Arizona, a city dubbed the copper capital of the U.S., mining firms are celebrating. Companies like Freeport-McMoRan, whose Morenci mine is among the largest in North America, have seen stock surges of nearly 12% since the tariff was announced. Their gain? A sudden domestic pricing advantage. But even they aren't fully insulated. "Sure, we're thrilled short-term," one executive admitted. "But if Canada and Mexico retaliate, we could lose access to critical equipment and reagents shipped through their ports." That's the geopolitical boomerang Washington may not have calculated. Copper isn't mined in a vacuum. It's a globally linked industry. Many American firms rely on Canadian-made haul trucks, South Korean smelting tech, and Mexican labor for processing. With tensions high, each of those pieces could become a pressure point. The clock is ticking. Will the White House blink to avoid inflation and diplomatic fallout? Or will Trump stay the course, betting that economic pain buys political gain? The next few days may define a decade of trade. So, what's your call? Breakthrough or breakdown? Drop your prediction below. You might be the first to spot the next turning point in this copper Cold War.